Hello, how's it going?
Pretty good, yourself?
Pretty good. So, we're going to talk about some technology today.
We are going to talk about some technology. Oh boy, I got a few things I'm thinking of.
Alrighty, so what do you find amazing about the world of technology today?
Well, everything about the world of technology is amazing in its own sense, but one thing that just blows my mind, it seems like a weird thing, it doesn't seem like it's that significant, but latency response times for websites specifically. Oh man, that's my deal, right? Like, imagine you go to a website, you enter in the domain, you click enter, in 90 milliseconds, you have something displayed, right? Like, just imagine what's going on there, right? You hit enter, a signal from your computer travels thousands of kilometers. Maybe it travels to Toronto and then to Vancouver, then to Alberta, and then back for you. Thousands of kilometers in less than a tenth of a second. Like, it's absolutely amazing what can be done nowadays, especially compared to how it was even 20, 30 years ago, right? When dial-up was still the primary modem. It's just absolutely amazing.
So what exactly is latency So if we're talking latency time, what is the start time to the end time? Like, what is that?
So the latency for any given request is the time it takes between when the request was sent. So in this case, when you hit enter to that website and when all of the data has been loaded to the server and back. So that request, when you hit send, it has to go through a whole network before it gets back to you. It starts at your computer, and then it goes to a domain name server, right? And then it gets the IP address of the domain you're going to. Then it comes back to you. Then it goes again to that IP address, and maybe it gets routed, through Cloudflare or something in between, like at least one step, perhaps more. And then when it gets to that server again, it processes it and sends the info back to you. So the time between when you hit enter and when that final server has sent that info back to you is the latency of it. It's how long it takes for you to get your information.
So it's like if I click on a button on Google, then it's how fast when I click on that button on Google and then something pops up on my screen from Google, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's also rendering and stuff in there when it's a web page, but the primary time spent is going to be in the network. And just for reference, right? So now on modern internet speeds, say fiber, you can get, I think they're touting you can get a gigabit per second. I've personally never had that. I think my speed right now is about 300 megabits per second. But for comparison, dial-up, which was like the primary method of internet connection back in the late 90s, early 2000s, only got 40 kilobits per second, right? So that's 5 kilobytes per second. 5 kilobytes per second. That same website that loads in 90 milliseconds now, I think it probably transfers maybe 1-2 megabytes of data, 20, 30 seconds to load on dial-up. Like, insane. It's unreal.
So wait, so kilobytes, kilobits, megabytes, what's the comparison scale here?
So technically it's on a 1024-bit base scale, but we're going to call it a 1000 base scale. So there are 1000 kilobits in a megabit, 1000 megabits in a gigabit, and then 8 bits in a byte. So there are 8 megabits in a megabyte, 8 gigabits in a gigabyte, 8 kilobits in a kilobyte, so on and so forth, right?
So if we were to do the calculation, about how much faster are we than we were with dial-up like 20 years ago now?
Well, of course, it depends on your internet speed, but I don't know, let's call it 40 up to 1000. I'm going to say, yeah, 100 to 1,000 times faster. Like on fiber, it's unreal. It is incomprehensibly fast. It is just mind-boggling. Like, imagine flying, like, I don't know, I've flown cross country once or twice, like flying here to Toronto. That's a 5-hour flight. That signal from your computer goes there back literally less than a tenth of a second. Like, that's
and you're in BC, right?
Yeah, I'm in BC, right?
Yeah.
Right over on the West Coast, like all the way across the country, instant. Absolutely insane.
So I guess the bigger question is then, beyond like the technical side of things, what sort of implications do you think this has kind of had on our society over the years? Say like our parents, so we're both 18 years old right now. Our parents, when they were growing up, didn't have internet at all, really, or even when they were getting into their early 20s and stuff, probably didn't really have very fast internet. So how over time do you think like this has impacted our society, changed the world, all that stuff?
That's a good question, right? Like the instant access to information, right? Like something nobody in history has had at the same level we have. And honestly, I think it affects every single aspect of our life, even the parts we don't realize, right? Like you want a quick bit of information, you want a recipe, right? Like let's say you want to make some cookies. Like it doesn't even, it's second nature to just go on your phone, look it up, and the recipe's there. Before, if you didn't have a cookbook, you'd have to either go down to the library and find one or go to the grocery store and buy a temporary copy, right? Like it just takes these ordeals that would take up significant portions of day and makes them instant, like instant. And we don't even think about it. We don't even consider all of the work and history that's gone into each of these requests that we make. Because I don't know, I think Arcnet came out in 1916. It's sort of been built on that from there. So that's what, 60 years now? 60 years of work and history to go into that little request that gets you your recipe in a second, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just that, it's everything we do as well, like texting, phones. I guess phones are sort of built on a different system, but it's the same idea, right? Mobile data, that's a whole other one, right? Like having access to the internet everywhere we go, like just think of how insane that would be to somebody 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 30 years ago even, right? Like it's just unreal the volume of information we have at our fingertips at any given time.
It's crazy to think about technology. Like it used to be like a sci-fi thing to think that your fingerprint or your eye or something like that would be something that you'd be able to like open your phone with or open a door with now, right? But now we've got these fingerprint scanners. Everybody's got them on our phone, and we all just accept it, kind of thing too, right?
It's
like,
just there, right? Yeah.
It's insane how fast that technology.
It's absolutely unbelievable.
So you said, what was it, Arcnet? Is that
Arcnet,
what,
yeah.
Arcnet? And that was in the 1960s. Do you know much about that?
I know a bit about it, so I'll see what I can think. So Arcnet, I know it was sort of, it's the precursor to the modern internet. It's the first thing that was created that people could sort of point at and say, yeah, that's what the internet was built upon. So I think what differentiated it from any previous experiments was that it was the first to use the TCP/IP stack. And I won't get too in depth as to what those are, but basically it's a method of sending packets across the internet, and it's the same method we use now, right? So while the specifics of it might be different, the fundamental protocols that it was built upon are the same that we use today, right? And that came out in the 60s. I think it was a military experiment, right? And I think the first time they tested it, they only managed to send two characters. They managed to send an L and an O. They were trying to spell login between two universities in the US, but it crashed after two characters. They only got two across, and then the system crashed. But it was the first time it had ever been done on an applicable scale, right? Like they had sent information beforehand, but it didn't really function the same way. But this was scalable and could be built upon to reach higher things. I think that was in the early 60s, like 1961 to 1965-ish. And then 10 years later, like in 1975, or 76, I think, was the first time the Queen ever sent an email. Of course, she gets special access to all the new stuff. So I think it was 76, the first time the Queen managed to send an email across the Atlantic Ocean. So think in just 10 years from crashing after sending an L and an O between two universities in the same country, they managed to get the Queen to send a message all the way across the Atlantic to the US, right? So it's just advanced at such a rapid scale since it came out.
And now me and you can sit here on the internet and have a Zoom call and have a full-on conversation like we're sitting beside each other. It's crazy.
It's insane, right? Yeah, that'd take a lot of emails to send those images one by one.
Yeah. So I guess then we've talked about the past. We've talked about what's happened in the past with sort of internet and how fast it's going and what's gone on in the past. Is this, so at the present moment, is it equal for everybody for access? Like around the world, what's like, do you have any knowledge on the state of internet around the world? Or is that something like that's kind of still developing in certain places? Like how's that going? Do you have any idea on that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, just due to the nature of it as being a very developed commodity, a lot of developed nations still don't have adequate access to the internet, right? And I honestly think that is one of the most important things to develop a country's like not just its economy, but every aspect of it further, right? Having instant access to the internet. So of course, when you think of developed countries, you think the US, you think Canada, right? Most of Europe, they all have access to high-speed internet. But, you go down into sub-Saharan Africa, even Australia has terrible internet, believe it or not. Like they're
Really,
still
eh?
rocking on like 100, 150 kilobytes per second. It's insane. But yeah, you go down there and there are very few places on the earth where you can't get an internet connection, whether it be through satellite or on ground. But there are a lot of places where it is not developed to a point where it could be reasonably applicable on a day-to-day basis, right? And I honestly think that would be, if I had the ability to, that is where I would center my resources to help developing nations, right? Give them immediate access to high-speed internet, right? Because not only would it benefit them in the short term, but it would also lay out the infrastructure for long-term development of the entire country. In my humble opinion, I think that it is the single most important commodity for a developing nation.
Coming from a techie, obviously, right? Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
I guess my other thing too is, so if it's not just about worldwide, like worldwide development is super important. Where do you see, say, in the next, so since the time we were born, internet has drastically improved to speeds that are beyond comprehension. Like we've lived through tech revolutions just as everybody else has, right? It's always been there for us, but it's been really slow at the beginning and not used very much. Say the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years, where do you see this going? What do you have any ideas or any predictions for where it's going to go?
That's a good question. I think about that fairly often, but honestly, it just mutates so quickly that I think it's impossible to put together a competent guess or anything more than like 5 years in the future, right?
Okay.
So I think a primary development that's going to be made is widespread access to 5G network cellular connection. So 5G, it just operates on millimeter wavelengths, right? Like it's a better wireless connection. So I think a widespread usage of that would really make the internet immediately accessible everywhere. Like, you go up to northern Canada, you go up to Nunavut or something, they don't even have internet there, right? But you get 5G connection everywhere, and it's just so insanely fast, like gigabytes per second. That I think is going to be a very widespread thing in the coming future. It's not very prevalent yet, like you got population centers have, like Toronto has it, Montreal has it, Vancouver has it, but it's not really widespread in rural areas. So I think it's just going to expand into rural areas. The general technological wave is going to expand into more rural areas, I think. Other than that, honestly, I don't think I could say. I think there's going to be some big things coming up, of course. Give it 10 more years. God knows what we're going to get. But yeah, I think the spread of 5G into rural communities will be a big thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's what about, so we've got lots of, like, what's on the front of technology right now? Like we've got AI, machine learning. Does that play a factor here at all? Like, do you think that plays a role in it getting faster, or that plays a role in what we might be able to do if we have faster internet? Do those intertwine in any way?
That's a good question. And quite honestly, I'm not sure I could tell you. I'm not really big into AI. AI isn't really my area of study, but I would imagine that you could use technologies like that just to help like not really as the new technologies, that use them to help you develop newer technologies, right? Or just in general, as a secondary sense, get people more comfortable with those technologies so that they don't object to newer technologies coming in, right? Like, of course, I'm not going to start on the whole 5G controversy, but if you get people comfortable with existing technologies, then a sudden change doesn't seem as bad, right? So I feel like I'm not sure if they help directly, but they help indirectly, just get everybody in the mindset of, okay, this is how the world's developing. Technology is going to become an integral part of every aspect of our life. Let's move forward from there.
And with that too, you get lots of people who maybe weren't like people who have the genius to be able to develop those things, right? And can attack problems in a totally different way with technology at their fingertips. I think that's totally the goal with this here, right? Is that when you're able to access more resources, access more materials and everything like that through the internet, it widens your scope of thought and really helps you in that way.
For sure, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on this? Did I miss anything?
No, I think we covered everything fairly intensively. There's uh up until, oh, when was it? I think it was up until, yeah, up until 1983, they didn't actually have domain names. They just had IP addresses. So before 1983, if you wanted to communicate over the internet, you wouldn't type in like example.com. You type in four
Or
groups
stimulation.ca.
stimulation.ca. Yeah, stimulation.ca. That's a good one, you know? Yeah. You wouldn't type in the actual IP address. You wouldn't type in the domain. You type in the IP, which is four groups of 1 to 3 numbers, 0 to 255, and that would route you. And of course, it gets kind of difficult remembering all those groups of numbers. So they were finally like, okay, we need to do something about this. Let's make names for them. And so in 1983, I believe it was, the first domain name system came out with the edu, .gov, .com, .mil, .org, .net, and .name for websites. Much easier to remember than the group of numbers. Okay, well, an interesting thing about those groups of numbers, back when they were first coming out, so they had each number was between 0 and 255, and they had 4 of those. Let me do some quick math. Yeah, so that gives you about 4 billion possible combinations of numbers, right? And they were like, 4 billion, that's enough for every device ever. We won't ever have an issue with that. Easy, for sure. There's never going to be more than 4 billion devices connected to the internet. We only have 6 now. And, you know, then population growth happened, and now we have way more than 4 billion. They're like, huh, that's unfortunate. So a little while ago, they came out with a new system for naming devices on the internet, IPv6, which sort of fixes the issues of the old one. Like, I just think it's interesting to think that in the span of 30 years, they went from thinking we will literally never have 4 billion, it's not even going to be an issue, to having to come up with an entirely new system because of how quickly it grew, right? Like, not only did this grow faster than we can comprehend, it grew faster than they could have comprehended. The people making it could comprehend, right? And it's just insane, yeah.
Exponential. Everything's exponential.
Always. I think the first actual registered domain, I think it was out of Massachusetts. I think it was symbolics.com for a manufacturing company in Massachusetts. I figure that was probably 1984 or 85. I think it was 1985. So like 2 years after the domain name registry came out.
So there was e-commerce going on back in 1984 or 1983 then. To your or not e-commerce, but like general advertising and information being available on there.
Something like that. Yeah, I think calling it anything related to what we have today would be pushing it. Like HTML didn't even come out until 1990. I think it was Tim Berners-Lee. Yeah, 1990, Tim Berners-Lee, a scientist at CERN, made the HTML markup language, which is how we make websites now, right? Mm-hmm. So honestly, I couldn't tell you what the original Symbolics website looked like. If I had to guess, I'd say it was probably like name, address, contact. Yeah. But yeah, it was the first to come out. Yeah, that's actually interesting to think. They had a website 5 years before they had HTML. Huh.
Yeah.
Seemed like cart before the horse there type thing.
Maybe it would just be like maybe just like be a black screen of like text with, you know, like just a text-based website strictly without any styling of any sort. Probably, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a great conversation. I think we can continue and do this some more. And yeah, we'll definitely be back with some more. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Aidan. Thanks for the chat.
Sure.
Been a good
time.
Thank
you for the interview. Thank you.
All righty. Cool.